is back. Do we? Oh, I guess we need the mic for the recording, right? Okay. All right. So this course is about interfaces, but I said like I'm going to use a phenomenon just to make it concrete, and the phenomenon I'm using is questions. So give me an example. We'll use English primarily because that's a common language. I've worked some on Hindi. It's kind of funny. I started on questions through Hindi. Actually started on questions through correlatives in Hindi. And the way it actually started was that I was hired to look at correlatives, which at the time, this I'm talking 1984, 85, when I started, correlatives were not so well known. Everyone knows what a correlative is? Not so well known then. And then multiple correlatives, जो लड़का जिस लड़की के साथ खेलता है वो उसे हरा देता है, whatever. Like I would try to explain to my advisor who didn't know about correlatives, that the semantics is the same as multiple WH questions. My advisor was Italian, so they don't have multiple WH questions. So this was another level of, or another obstacle in the way. But then in trying to explain, I kind of got into questions because I was thinking, so this is a methodology of explanation by analogy, right? So if you look at a new phenomenon that's different, sometimes and there's a phenomenon that it relates, you have intuitions that it's like something else. It makes sense to use that as an analogy, and whatever explanation works for that, you say, okay, then that's what this is. But believe me, in the process, you always have something to say. What you think is the explanation is never quite that, right? You start looking from a new perspective, and then you find that what people have said about multiple questions or something is not quite what, it's missing something that you see. That's how research goes, right? So it starts that way. So I'm looking, I've looked at questions, I looked at Hindi, but most of what I'm going to be focusing on in these lectures are really English-centered, and I haven't had time to go back and really think, is this how it is in Hindi? For several of the things that we discuss, which is the other language that I know natively. But perhaps this workshop will, push me in that direction along with you guys. So I know there's a number of different languages that people are working on or are interested in. And I think Avinash said that we will discuss how to do the workshops, like maybe after this lecture. But you all should have some ideas too. Like if you've been in workshops before, you can think about what works, what you think doesn't work. I think we can make it a more collaborative venture. So let me start by asking for a few examples about questions, and then I have a handout, so I didn't come unprepared. But let's see if you came prepared. No, I'm kidding. Whatever, just give me a question, and then we'll see anybody? A question or a non-question, okay? So you have no excuses. So either give me something that you think is a question or something that you think is not a question. From this side of the room, one or two, yes?
What is your name?
On the other side, okay. All right, here, yes. You're well stocked, okay. So we have a question here. What is your name? I'll take one or two more and then we can discuss a little bit. A question from this side of the room.
Do you have a chalk?
Do you have a chalk? Okay. Should we stop with just these two or should we take one or two more? Maybe people at the back are feeling left out. How about something from the back? Yes.
Where did you go?
Where did you go? Okay. One from that side.
Are you sure about it?
Ooh. So everybody agrees that these are I said you could give me a question or a non-question, right? Everybody gave me questions. Is that the idea? So do we all agree that these are 4 questions here? Anybody have any doubts? No doubts whatsoever. Okay. Course is
Fourth one isn't the question.
What?
Maybe the fourth one isn't the question.
Maybe the 4th one isn't a question. Elaborate a little bit why?
In some context, we would say the first statement, but not as a question. Right? We're not really expecting an answer.
So you're thinking that it's a way of saying you don't really know. Do you get that? So I think your name is Kanupriya. I think she has in mind that the okay, so it's a question, it's a rhetorical question. But there's a sense when I asked you for a question, you didn't say what kind of question. There's a sense of a default, right? Rhetorical question in a way marks something as special. So whenever you have something that's marked special, there's a sense of default, right? So I think Kanupriya was working on some notion of default. And I saw some heads nodding when she said, you're not really asking. So would someone like to elaborate on why this is, so you think this is a question and this is not a question? Anybody else agrees with that, or anyone else wants to say that's not a real question? What is your name? Yes.
It really depends on the context. Like, for example, like this happens a lot in India. Like, for example, you do something that goes against, let's say, something that you're expected to do, and then the person comes like, "What is your name?" Right? So there's like, again, the context. I mean, the pragmatics of it can make the first one also.
But I'm putting words in people's mouths, huh? Because you don't have. But Kanupriya's idea was that when you ask and it's a real question or a non-hyphenated question, then you're expecting an answer of some kind, right? So in that context where you're doing something not so right, someone comes and asks, what's your name? Maybe there's a double message there, but are you supposed to give your name? Are you supposed to give information?
It may not be necessarily be a name, right?
So flesh it out. What would you say?
For example, I have in Hindi, if you do it, right?
Go ahead.
So,
Everybody follows basic Hindi, or you can, yeah.
So if you say naam kya hai, so,
Uh-huh.
so the person is like, you can justify your act in Hindi. You don't respond to like naam kya hai. You don't tell your name, but then you said maybe I was right and I'm not doing anything wrong.
So you think the person was asking your name so that they're going to report you or something, and then you say, look, there's no problem. Okay, but you see, yes, that
second one maybe, yes, I do have a chalk. I'm not asking that you have chalk or not. I'm saying that please give me the chalk.
Okay, so already I hadn't heard. Also, what is your name in this context? I'm asking you all the time, right? What's your name in different ways? Can you all ask me what is your name at this point? It's a bit like, what movie was that? It was a very famous movie. Chameli, tumhara naam kya hai? Basanti, whatever, flower. Once you know the name, you can't. It's still the same question, right? What is your name? Yes.
The way in which what is your name, especially in Hindi, when I can think of it, could be said in a very sarcastic way. And I do that.
You do that a lot?
Meaning,
okay, don't let him ask that question of you. Okay.
No, but I think with where I grew up, I think it's pretty common when you're saying something and it's just absurd. Then you would say, either you would say, which village are you from? So or you would say, tumhara naam kya hai? So
I see.
that's, I'm being sarcastic towards the person.
Where did you grow up? Just curious.
Stay away.
Lucknow. I see. Okay. So, but then I want to ask you, why only in Hindi? Do you think, like, maybe we can do, maybe not this particular question?
See, the intuition that I have in I cannot say the same for other languages.
Okay.
English is there.
Yeah.
I have some stammering of English, but I do not get that sense. I would not do that in English.
Yeah. Anybody else feel that way? That
Yeah. Yes, like
Mhm.
maybe in at least in Pune, a lot of time the similar question is asked in a way of a kind of an insult. Maybe if someone does something wrong,
Mhm.
oh, so what school were you in?
Uh-huh.
Where did you go?
Right. It's so. I think you mentioned that too, right? When okay, so it's like, who are you? Who are you? Uh-huh. So yes, Shrikar. Yeah.
Even in English, it could be used in some other way. For example, if you're like a boxing
Uh-huh.
trainer,
Uh-huh.
and then there's some guy in the ring, then you say, "What's your name?" Like, get up and fight.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that, but then
Mm.
it's not like that.
So it's possible to have a sense of question, but we all see we're all working with some norm, and we're saying we can use these questions. So when we first put up these questions, nobody objected, right? Everybody thought it fits the definition of question by some standard. And I'm going to ask you, is it so? The four components or aspects of grammar that we will be focusing on: syntax, semantics, pragmatics, and prosody. Prosody is the one I know least about. I know enough to know that I should know more. Yeah, and when we start talking about pragmatics, prosody is very important. So, I'll do the best I can, but I can't pretend to have much control over it. So, by which of these four um, aspects of grammar did everyone come up with this example or accepted these examples as questions? Syntax. Yes. Why? Because in English, first of all, English or Hindi, these two are WH questions, constituent questions. There's no way it's a declarative. Um, you That's one marker. But along with that, there is ox inversion. So even here, this one you can't see. So one could argue you are sure. So here with the yes no question, that's it. Okay. But if we were talking about Hindi, we wouldn't have subject ox inversion if we were to translate these. So then the discussion would have gone differently, right? What would we have focused on to say, okay, you would, if I just wrote it, you wouldn't probably, without punctuation marks, you wouldn't. So this would be tumhara naam kya hai, right? So that is okay. Kya will give us the cue that it's a question. And what about tumhare paas chalk hai? Prosody is the only cue then, right? So, because tumhare paas chalk hai. I'm not even doing it right. But if you were looking for, I said, tumhare paas chalk hai, tum likho. So that's a declarative or a non-question. But tumhare paas chalk hai, that would become a question. So prosody is the only cue that we have there. And yet we manage quite well. But where exactly prosody plays into, is it part of syntax? Often you have these marks, right, that then the phonology interprets a certain way. So there are all these questions, but in a sense, we discussed even looking at these, that what is your name or any, that is the canonical question, which we will call the default question is information seeking question, right? I don't know something, I want to find out, I think you know it. So that's sort of the basic, we have to start somewhere. What I want to suggest is that even when you don't have a pragmatically, you say that's not really a question. It's you're really making an assertion of some kind. The semantics of question, we have to stick with it, because what is the goal of linguistic analysis? We all agree that none of us really knew we were going to be discussing these questions, and yet there's general agreement, right? That when people are saying, "Oh yeah, you can use it this way," or you can use, people understand what's going on. We have these intuitions, just as we have. If I had said, "Am you sure about it?" you would have said that's not grammatical, right? That there's an agreement problem. So we have, just like we have intuitions about grammaticality, we clearly have intuitions about the pragmatics of a question, but the link between the syntax and the pragmatics has to be semantics. And one of the things that we will look at is what is the role? Do we want a different semantics for what is your name when it is asked of, when I ask you, because I'm still learning your name, maybe you told me but I've forgotten, so I have to ask you again. Or when you're saying, who are you to tell me this, right? So do we want to really say they have different semantics, or do we want to find a way to connect a fixed semantics to different possible uses, right? That's, any questions? Should we start with the handout? Are you all ready to give up your favorite questions that you've put up on the board, or would you like to, is there anything more that you would like to say at this point? Okay, so now we have this handout, and we have about, Avinash, you said 2 hours, right, for this. So, and then we can, yes. Any questions? Everybody has the handout. This is, so I didn't number my handouts because I was a little unsure how, but this one says introducing the interface. So that sounds like number 1. Okay. So everybody has that, and pardon?
Introducing the interface, there are 2 handouts.
Oh, are there?
Two handouts starts with that phrase.
Oh, so let me check. What is a question? Yes, that is the first one. Okay, all right. So I'm just going to kind of run through some of the things, but I want you all to kind of stop me or add, or if you want an elaboration or whatever, because I'm also trying. So here's the thing, today is my day of sort of learning where you all are at in terms of your background, and it'll be different. Not everybody has had the same, and we're not in a hurry, we can ask. So one question, actually one more thing, let me just check if I put that in. Okay, maybe that is okay. Take it. All right, so there are 2 things that we'll keep in mind. One is the syntactic form. As we saw, all those are syntactically questions. Interrogatives, that could be a term. The other is what they're used for, and that's asserting, asking, answering. These are the 3 terms I used. One question is, are there really 3 different speech acts, so to say, or just 2 that we use differently? Okay, but like I said, I'm using questions as the lens through which to view the interfaces. So I said questions are a quintessential interface phenomenon, and so they can be, as we already saw, and a little bit in talking about Hindi, but even when you said, are you sure, there's a different intonation than if you were asking, do you have a chalk, right? So there's already even in English you see the difference that prosody makes. So let's look at some standard example. What is your name? Canonically we would say that is a question, but of course now we know differently. But also you wouldn't really ask this question if you're asking it as a information seeking question of a person you've already met. It's a usually when we forget names, like for the next 2 days, I think I'm okay, I can still ask. After that, it's a bit rude to ask the name of someone you've been talking to for a while. So, it's not really, it's only a question that you can ask. That shows that you can only ask a question when you don't have information. The other point with this is sometimes, like, I hadn't thought of these examples, context that you all gave me, but when people meet little babies and they they're trying to show the parents that I'm very much into your career. They say, oh, what is your name or something. It's not a real question. They're just showing appreciation or they find the kid cute or something. So a lot depends on who is asking of whom, right? But canonically, what is your name, people will accept as a question. Is the Pope Catholic? You probably heard this one, right? That is what we would call a rhetorical question. Why?
He is Catholic by definition.
Because?
The Pope is by definition
if you know about Catholicism, you know about Pope. But imagine that you are someone who hasn't been exposed to this religion, and someone says something, and you can ask, "Oh, is the Pope Catholic?" And someone is, "Of course." Didn't you? And they're like, "Where have you been living?" But it could be, you could think of a situation where someone just hasn't been exposed to, you know, maybe you live in a culture that hasn't is has not they've been exposed to maybe even other types of Christianity, and then someone mentions Pope. So you could be asking this as a real question. So nothing in the question per se tells you whether it's rhetorical or an information seeking question. A question like this. It's a world knowledge that tells, rules out an information seeking question, but it's not in the syntax or the semantics of the question. It is part of how we view this, that we're thinking this couldn't be a question, this couldn't be a request for information, so then what is it? And of course, that's how it gets used. The other thing is that the rhetorical question depends on the addressee also understanding that this is not a real, a request for information. We've all been in contexts where we make something for effect, we say something for effect, and the other person takes it literally and answers yes, anything. This person is a little boring, doesn't get nuances, doesn't get the stylistics. But the point is that, yeah, this is not a question that we normally would associate with information seeking. Who are you to tell me what to do? This is a bit like are you sure about it? That's when you're trying not to be rude. Basically, you're saying this is not a good idea, right? You want to leave at some late hour, taking Uber by yourself or whatever, I don't know. Something like that. You say, are you sure about it? You really want to do this? It's a way of saying, perhaps you shouldn't, right? But some questions, who are you to tell me what to do? Now, can we even interpret this as a real question? I could answer, I'm your mom, or I'm your teacher. But that's not why you already know that I'm your teacher, right? You're questioning my authority. And so who are you to tell me what to do? Even if I can answer, I'm your boss, I'm your teacher, I'm your mother, whatever, it still wasn't what the question was asking. I'm kind of playing the game of taking it as a literal question. But I'm making this up. I never actually discussed this. I'm just, if you don't agree or if you see something else, that's fine. What I'm again trying to emphasize is that in a sense, each of these things could be a real question, but something in the form kind of rules it out. So Pope and Catholic, these are two words that have a connection such that chances are that the person, in most contexts, they could not be information seeking. Who are you to tell me what to do is really very unlikely to create a context in which it could be an information seeking question is really, really hard. I think with a slight change, perhaps one could do it. I don't know. Who are you? I don't know if I can do it. Is it possible to make it I'm trying to make a few changes to see if I could, let's say you're in a situation where someone is going to come and give you some information or something, or someone has come to tell you to make a change, and you can say something to the equivalent to, are you authorized to give this command? But I don't think we would really use this kind of locution. So that one really pushes at the idea of information seeking. Now, from a linguist point of view, does that mean we need to have a different semantics for this, or should we have the same semantics and find a way to move from canonical to non-canonical? So, any questions at this point? I told you, yawn if you want me to move or something. Yeah, maybe I should plant some signals so that you can start, scratching your head or something. Anyway, so we've been looking at things that we've classified syntactically as questions and said that we can just think of many contexts in which we may not really be interested in the information. Now I'm looking at some non-interrogative structures and asking, is that a question? So using the same word, but maybe now differently. So the syntax, if you read the literature, there's a lot of variation. What is called a question varies. So what about it's raining? So this is English, not Hindi. Hindi, we don't have a choice. We don't have this subject ox inversion or verb fronting. But in English, people do say it's raining. Is that a question? Syntactically not. If you put in the prosody, if prosody is part of syntax, so if prosody is part of form, then we'll say, well, that's not really a declarative, right? It's got a, but the syntax doesn't quite match that, but you'd say it's a question, right? So can I ask this, you all here? Well, this is Mumbai. It's not going to rain in this season, but suppose. Can I say, is it raining? If someone comes in, let's say, or I can ask you, you guys all have laptops and all. Are you allowed to use yours? Can I ask you, is it raining? I can ask you, is it raining in, what place could it be raining in? Chennai. I can always have a question, what do I know? If I ask, is it raining in Chennai? I can ask that question, right? For whatever reason. Can I say, it's raining in Chennai? In this context? Yes, no, why?
Maybe if you're very familiar with the city and you know that it doesn't rain in Chennai in December or
Okay.
January,
Uh-huh.
then it shows a bit of surprise that it's raining.
Surprise at what?
Surprise that it's raining.
So did I know whether, so right now we have no information, right?
No, but
So
if you already someone told you that it's raining and
Okay.
you are expressing disbelief and want to clarify it.
Okay.
The presupposition that you have about the place.
Some information. So there's this distinction between a
Or
new.
are we seeking information or just expressing surprise that it is
So there are many layers here. So you want to share?
No, I'm saying that you're implying that it's impossible that it could be raining.
So that's the surprise part. But so there are two things here that are worth keeping in mind. One, it's not a neutral question, right? Like I can just say, is it raining? I have to write a report, and I'm just like, tell me, is it raining? But I think it came up even in this short discussion that when I say it's raining, someone should have said, oh my God, there's, it's raining. You confirming, but it's not a neutral question. There should be some evidence you just got suggesting that it's raining. And only then can you ask this question. So there's a bias, this is another thing that we'll become very familiar with. We've already seen this context at play, right? In all of these discussions that we were having, you created these contexts and you said that's not really a real question. So this too, but you may not know the answer. You're surprised. So you've seen some evidence, but the classic example for this we'll see, I'm sure, as we do our readings, is you're sitting in a basement, windowless basement room. Someone comes in with wet raincoat or something. So you get some evidence. Now, technically, it could be because they walked through, someone was cleaning, and there was water falling and why they were wearing a raincoat, I don't know. But let's say they were just wearing regular clothes. They got wet because somebody spilled water on them. So technically, it's still a possibility that it's not raining, but you definitely have got some information where there may be some surprise, sometimes even without surprise. Someone is leaving and you just want to confirm. You say, you start putting your stuff together and you say you're leaving. Maybe not so much surprise, but there's something like that there. But one could argue that still, the form itself is an interrogative form in some sense because it's got this prosody. The prosody is part of the formal cue. But now, let's say we're going on and on. We're still on page 1, and you turn to your friend and you say, I wonder what time it is. Your friend is likely to say, it's only 11:40. right? But you didn't ask for the time, did you? You just said, I wonder what time it is. That's a declarative. No subject object inversion, right? It's only in the matrix that we do it. But you'll be surprised at how often we will give information, because even though it's an embedded clause and it's not taking scope or whatever term you want to use, you understand that why am I telling you what's going on in my head? Because really, I mean, I could as well have said, what time is it, right? But we use language in different ways. The point is, syntactically, we have a declarative, a non-question, but the pragmatics, we don't even process it, so, it's like you give the answer. And I'm sure you can think of other examples. So, how are we going to proceed with this? This is our working hypothesis, my working hypothesis. You should challenge me if you don't like it, and we can discuss it. The interrogative is the canonical form for seeking information, and the primary job of semantics is to explicate the relation between the interrogative form and the speech act of questioning. So this idea that you're using language to get something, to create, to impact on someone's action, that's a speech act. I'm not just randomly reciting. We could do that too, right? We write examples on the board. That's not a speech act of questioning. When I put the example, it's mentioning, I don't know if it's even a speech act. We may recite a poem that has questions in it. We may read a text. We're not really then engaged in speech act of question. Maybe in the story someone is engaged in it. But the working hypothesis that we will start with is simply take a basic direct question, identify its form. Depending on the language, there'll be some variation, of course, but every language, I'm guessing, has ways of asking questions, right? We couldn't, some things we just need to do. We need to find out people's names. Maybe not, but many, I mean, I cannot imagine, I don't know, that's not my area of expertise, but I cannot imagine a community of people that can get away without ever asking. They couldn't be that self-centered, self-contained, that they never need to ask a question. So they must have ways of asking questions. And so the basic dynamic that we want in the speech act is a speaker and an addressee. There could be more than one addressee, but that's the minimum. And the idea is that this speech act, that's the pragmatics of questioning, or if it's a declarative of asserting, and you have the form. Semantics is the connection between the two. How do you get from the form to the function, that form and function, let's say, right? In between is the content, the meaning. So that's one of the things we'll be looking at. And my general take that I will try to push is that the link between form, content, and function is fixed. But when the context doesn't match the function, then we look for ways, but it's not random. We look for ways in which we can move to some other speech act. So this is, many of you, I know you've done pragmatics, we go to an indirect speech act. And that indirect speech act could be a speech act of order. I think you said that you have a chalk, could be a way of saying, can you give, no, again, I used a question, give me a piece of chalk, right? Which is not the speech act of questioning, but the speech act of ordering or requesting. Directive, I think, a directive speech act. But that has to be, if you want a systematic, if you think all of these things are systematic, then you have to say there is a distinction between a direct speech act and an indirect speech act, right? That, otherwise, from one point you randomly would go to any number of things. Perhaps it is possible to do it. I haven't thought of it, but maybe that's something one can think about. That you have a template of these, there are all these possible speech acts that we can have. Whichever one fits, works. That's probably a way to think about it. But you still need the one for the basic one, so no getting away from that. The second point, so This does not mean this, so this is the Indirect Speech Act. Interrogatives that do not fulfill the felicity conditions for questioning, or non-interrogatives that do, are not legitimate objects of study, but we will talk about that. Okay? Any questions at this point? Okay. Cross-linguistic variation. In this classroom, I don't need to spend too much time, but let me, with Hindi, so I put in Hindi in my book because that's, something I know. I didn't have to look up references to make up an example. So of course we see if you have tumhara naam kya hai, the word kya gives it away that it's a question. Ravi bahar hai. If I didn't have that prosody, it could be an answer to a question. It could be just a straight out, I'm going to tell you something about Ravi. Ravi bahar hai, wo ye kar raha hai, wo kar whatever, right? So other than prosody, there's no way of telling that 3B is a question. But there are other languages that, so these are WH in situ languages, etc. Although we know that, there are ways of looking at things that look in situ that also people might argue involve movement. Now, in this course, I won't be too concerned with the syntax up to a point, but not. Let's see if I can justify this, other than I don't feel like. But here's a justification. In a way, we are looking at interfaces. It's totally legitimate. I think someone here said like they would like to understand syntax more, but it doesn't really matter that we have a syntax that does not have, let's say, WH movement in tumhara naam kya hai. So that let's assume that there is no movement. Let's take that in situ. And let's assume that in English there is movement. What is your name? Really, is the semantics that different? If you look at the canonical, you're still going to talk. You have to find a way to get. The meaning doesn't seem to be that different. Maybe some uses, but those also seem like, a little bit culturally, it has become common to use it sarcastically. But maybe one test, that same group of people could use maybe English if they decided to with the same. So that seems like a stylistic deviation a little bit or something. I'm not sure how exactly to think of it, but the basic case doesn't seem to vary whether kya is in situ or fronted. Now there are people who might argue that in fact that kya is not in situ, not where it was generated, but it has moved to a pre-verbal focus position. Again, the meaning, so all of this actually is hinting at what is the meaning of a question. Anybody have a clue who's read ahead, or how do we look at the semantics of questions? A question denotes a set of possible answers, and you can define it in different ways. If you think about that, then what is your name with fronting, or they seem to have some similarity. We can talk about where there may be variations, but at least as a starting point, I would like to say that languages may package the thing differently on surface, but we have to get to the same meaning, same set of possible answers. What about Japanese? Is everybody familiar with how Japanese makes questions? Are you familiar with it? No, good. So you give me an excuse, a reason to be here. So I will. He knows it already. I'm going to teach to you. No. It's Hindi. I can't pretend to be saying anything new. Now is my chance. Okay. So Japanese is also so broadly speaking, there's the fronting languages. There's the in situ languages. But fronting as well as in situ also have variation. So Hindi, I'm arguing, is an in situ language, right? But maybe that's just me. It looks in situ at least. Let's put it. So if this was a subject, we would say, "Kaun bahar khada hai?" or "Kisne tumhe kitab di?" We could, although people argue that it's best before the verb, but there's a case to be made. Now, Japanese is really an in situ language because they really don't worry about the position of the WH. However, there are some differences. So if you, the same question, not the same question, it's a different question. What did Mary buy? It is an SOV language. And as you can see, the what is in object position before the verb. But there's a Q morpheme that, what's your name? Vyom was telling us about. Ka at the very end. If this ka was not there, so unlike Hindi or English where the word itself only works as a question word, kya or what, Nanio will become something like Mary bought something. It's the ka that makes it into a question. And then when you have like if you ask yes no question, Mary aspects bought, with the ka there it becomes did Mary buy aspects. If the ka was not there, then it would be a statement. I'm sure prosody is different too, but the prosody is cued to this Q particle. So it's not like, I'm sure there's some variations the way we saw in English that even without subject object and verb. So I don't know a lot about it, but the idea is that you can have these variations, and yet in some sense, if we are using the idea that questions denote the set of possible answers, then there are different ways in which languages make it available. The idea that I'm looking for information, the packaging varies, and we have to get from all these variations to something that sounds like it should be the same. Now, this may sound a little, making a big deal out of nothing, but think about quantifier scope, non-WH. Languages really, they may vary in how much scope permutation they allow, but on surface syntax, by and large, those are all in situ. All the quantifiers are in situ, right? Mostly. Yeah, for certain discourse effects, you might do fronting or whatever, but it's not like WH words that, question formation that come flagged as a special thing. There's nothing special about quantifiers that tell you I must be in a special position. There's something special about the semantics, no doubt. And in fact, the semantics we'll see is not that different from question semantics if you're really just looking at the quantifiers. Or at least that's how people have analyzed them. So I think it's kind of an interesting, I don't know if it's a real question that we need to think more deeply about, but why are there so many different ways of forming questions? I don't know. It doesn't, we could all, it could have been like SOV, SVO, yeah, certain amount of variation, but this seems like a very rich field to package things so differently. So now turning to fronting languages, we are used to English. Of course, English is a fronting language, but now if I was to ask, so I have an example from Bulgarian there, but in English, if I wanted to ask who wants to eat what for lunch, right? People will give me different ideas. We will pair off people and food, right? Or who has read what, or who has studied how much semantics, like, many ways we can ask. Only one WH will come in the beginning of the sentence. The other one will stay in C2. But you go to the next language over, Bulgarian, and here you have to put all of them in the beginning. Who, what, what. Again, there are some differences. I actually don't know if we will discuss them in this class because I planned for 4 days and I wanted to see how far we get. So this is one of the things that I'm interested in. What's the difference between languages that put all the WHs in the front and languages that don't? And there are some interesting differences, but I won't go there today. So in 6, I just put a schema. This is a partial schema of the variations in different languages. So either you can have a WH phrase in the beginning, and then I just put in gap as a neutral term. It's missing from the main clause. And you may have a second WH phrase. So this is English-like. Bulgarian, if you have one WH, it's in the beginning. If you have two, it's in, or both of them are in the beginning. If you have three, all three in the beginning. Japanese, you have Q morpheme, and then it binds what are called indeterminates. They could be, if it's a Q morpheme, then this indeterminate becomes like a WH word. If if there's another morpheme, actually it comes closer to it, then it becomes like someone, indefinite. There's another morpheme, the same base form, then becomes like everyone. So, but that's how they do it. So these are just some of the and then there's of course Hindi, which is looks like everything is in situ. So what we will be discussing is abstracting away a little bit in the lectures, but perhaps in the workshops they'll come in. So again, to give you a little bit of background, when I was doing my dissertation, the prevailing view then was that WH fronting languages obey islands, because we see, you can't say which book did you meet the man who wrote. But that was for fronting. When it comes to WH in C2, because of Jim Huang's work, the general idea was at LFO, things that stay in C2, they can take covert scope at any level. So in Chinese, if you said something that was the equivalent of, Mary ate what? That's a direct question. What in your knowledge Mary ate? But in Hindi, if you say, Mary जानती है कि, तुम जानते हो कि Mary ने क्या खाया? That's a sense, you're not asking for a question, right? It's very hard to get that reading. So, we will be talking about things based on English, somewhat informed by what I know about how things work in other languages. But I'm going to stick a little bit, it's maybe a bit boring, but stick to English. But then that's what the workshop or the extra things that we'll talk about. Some things I expect will be universal, and some things I expect will be open to variation. But one can learn. For example, again, when I wrote my book in '96, I thought that Bulgarian and English behave the same. They move to the front. I don't want to get, the data might come later. And that's what I put in the book, because when I was eliciting the judgments, I was not tuned into a difference. I only discovered it in the last few years that there was a reason why I misunderstood what I got. So it happens. Okay. All right. So here's our felicity conditions for the speech active questioning. This is for the basic information seeking question. S does not know the truth. So there's a speaker and hearer. Yes. Yes, please.
Ka of Japanese is similar to auxiliary of English or something.
Yeah, tell them.
No, I mean, in any question, they just add it at the end of the question. I mean, if at the end of the sentence there's a car, then you know it's a question. It's just a plus Q more.
So I think his question, it's so that's true. Technically, it's not, because so there are two ways to answer your question. One, that what's your name? Ankita. One that Ankita gave, because the ox in English is there whether there's a question or not, right? So that's the perspective from which you're answering, that ka only comes in questions. So you're not playing with the same lexical items that you would have anyway. Ox is a matter of movement, right? You will have ox if you have a sense, except with the do support business. But basic one, if you take I have been to Paris, then you have those things, and then you move have in the beginning and you get a question. So from that perspective, it's different. From another perspective, you could say that why do we move ox to the beginning of the sentence? Because there is something that, I'm making some of this up, but I'm sure someone has said it. There is an abstract Q morpheme that this movement triggers, makes it, become visible. So then you're saying it's similar, right? In some sense. It's not the same, but it's doing the same thing. I think that's the clausal typing hypothesis. Anyone remember? We'll talk about it later. Lisa Cheng's idea was that, there are languages that have morphemes that flag. So it's important to flag whether something is which clause type it is, declarative or interrogative. there are languages that have these morphemes, and so they do the job. In other languages that don't have these morpheme, fronting can, and maybe I'm misremembering, but you get the general idea that that's a way of thinking about it where they are the same, and there's a way of thinking about it where they are different. So, but certainly it ends up having the same function. So, but that's good. Any other questions?
Ma'am, in the example 4A, can I use Nani before Merida?
Uh,
This is strictly insecure.
One
Yeah,
second.
this example 4A.
We are looking at 4A.
Yeah, can I use Nani before Merida?
Yes. So it Japanese is also a language that allows scrambling,
Okay.
right? So just like Hindi, we can say, क्या तुम्हारा नाम है? This sounds yeah, क्या तुमने खाया, right? That's, we can either say तुमने क्या खाया or क्या तुमने खाया, or तुमने खाया क्या, although that ends up having a little bit echo kind of reading. Japanese allows those things too. When you look at more complex structures, embedded questions, there are some differences in how, like this is still within the clause, it's freer how much you move things around. But suppose you had, if you look at embedded structures, you may get a slightly different answer. I'm not sure I want to. Yeah.
Is it in situ then? I mean, why have you classified it as in situ?
Why do I classify it as in situ? Good question. Why do we classify Hindi as an SOV language? Unmarked. But you know, when you really start, so how do we know something is unmarked?
That's the general use.
Pardon?
It's the general use, the basic order that we use.
I know, but I'm saying, why is it basic? So how do you sell your intuition? How do you make someone else understand you? It's not an easy, like you struggle with this, right? But it's a similar kind of question. I'm just, so the idea is this: typically when you do these word order variations, there's a sense in which you're thinking special discourse, right? It's only in this discourse that I can put it. So let me see if I can think about something. If you're starting a story, once upon a time there was a little boy who blah blah blah. He went to his mother and asked, you know, like that. So you create these neutral stories, and then you have a transitive sentence. Early in the beginning of the story, you're likely to have SOV order. But once the context that will allow OSV, for example, or SVO, are typically contexts that will also allow SOV. So so a context that is neutral will allow the basic order, not the non-basic order. A non-neutral context may lend itself very easily to a non-basic order, but I think very often it will also be a little tolerant of the basic order. So I think those are the kinds of arguments that one would use for saying that. And then to go back to your question, why would we classify it as in situ? The things that are happening are not happening just with questions, these variations. So I would not suppose Japanese was like English in being fixed word order without, when it's not a question context. Like declaratives in English, you really can't say John, Mary saw, or John saw Mary to mean Mary was the one seeing John. Like we just can't do it, right? For whatever reason, case or whatever. Suppose Japanese was like that when it came to declaratives, and then when it came to questions, it allowed movement, right? Then we would say that Japanese is an optional fronting language. That is, because that would be specific to question. But as far as I know, these variations are also, it's the same variation. It's like Hindi. We can move whether it's a question or not. So that's a good question. Any other questions on? Okay. So everyone is on board more or less with these with the felicity conditions? I think we kind of previewed it when we were looking at those questions. Okay. Going back to the it's raining case, so there are of course variations. So echo questions, half the time I don't hear what, if you speak too softly and I say, what did you say? Or what did you, I read something and I didn't hear it, I can say, you read what? And with echo questions, often you don't need to front. But I can also totally hear what you said and I can't believe it. That was someone was saying about expressing surprise. It's raining. This is Mumbai in January. Wow, it's raining. So that's incredulity question. And as far as I know, not much work has been done in the difference between echo and incredulity. But I think I know one fact that I will hold off on because, I have, we want to end this session at least at 1, right? Roughly, yeah. We'll discuss how far to go. So, remind me if I forget, but in a few days. Such questions do not involve fronting often, but they are marked by stress on W. So there are other cues that typically come with these things. And I gave the example there. John ate what? John ate the meat, and you thought he was a vegetarian. John ate what? And the other one is the first one where you didn't hear, the second one where you heard. And then we talked about is the Pope Catholic. Those are rhetorical. So these are interrogatives with special functions. Okay, terminology. I'm going to use question because it's such a common word. We've already seen the word question has too many different ways of thinking about it, but we also need to, be able to just communicate. So I'm just going to use question. From the context, it will be clear whether I'm using it in syntactic ways or in pragmatic ways. But there are some terms that I think I use it. So the word interrogative and declarative, I tend to use as syntactic terms. There are people who will use the word interrogative as the pragmatics of it, right? But by and large, but if ever there's a confusion, what I mean, just raise your hand. Question denotation, everybody has to say that's the semantics, right? That's what denotation means. What is its semantic content? And then speech after questioning, again, it's a mouthful, right? So I can't always, in talking, you will just say, the question, but again, if it's not clear, that's what we mean. Okay, so we're ready to do a little bit of the syntax semantics map. So this is the general big picture. Any questions on that? Srikar?
One short question. So till now, the examples we saw, we said prosody is responsible for changing, say, the speech act, like say, but there are this example that you gave, kya tumne khaya? You could say kya tumne khaya to ask, did you eat? Or
Yeah.
Kya tumne khaya? Like what did you eat?
So this is Hindi what, right? And I don't know if so this is one of the things that I do want to talk about next week, but let me just bring it up. There's a cue marker like the Japanese ka in Hindi, except there's a difference because it only occurs with yes no questions. Kya wo ghar pe hai? That's a yes no question, right? And the kya is optional. I can say wo ghar pe hai, wo abhi bhi ghar pe hai, or bahar pani pad raha hai. I can also say kya bahar pani pad raha hai. So you can add this kya. It's the same word as what, but it's being used as a yes no marker. The other thing is, if it was a transitive verb that I was using, like read or eat, and I don't know the object of it, then I can say, what was your example? Kya tumne khaya? Khaya. Kya tumne kya khaya? That would, let's say, be, and kya, the other kya also moves around. So this is Rajesh and I have been working on this. We call it polar kya, for kya tumne kha liya? Have you finished eating? Whereas if I say, tumne kya kha liya? What did you eat? That's not good. You'll get tummy problems or something. But that's the question word kya. So there's a distinction. But what was your question with regard to these two? I forgot.
I thought the only difference here was that there's a
The-
difference in prosody and not the
Right.
actual.
So the prosody difference, I would say, is riding on the fact that one is a yes/no question, and the other is a WH question.
No,
Because the kya is in a different position.
Okay, what? Let's.
So for me, kya tumne khaya is always a yes no question. Kya
तुमने
kya
क्या-
kya nahi, no. But if I want to front the kya,
Mhm.
kya khaya tumne would be what did I eat, but kya tumne khaya is always a yes no.
Okay. So you're putting a lot of money on fronting position, right?
Yeah, but kya khaya tumne is what did you eat?
Okay, let's.
Kya
The
tumne
question
khaya
is
is
favor the
How about तुमने क्या खाया?
tumne kya what did you eat?
No, तुमने खाया क्या? तुमने
is
खाया
yes.
क्या? Yes, that would be.
yeah.
Everyone is hungry, I think. Okay, I think there's something to be so. There is a difference in how much you stress the kya. That shifts the two. So that we make a distinction between polar kya and thematic kya. And thematic kya, I think, has more stress on it. So when you put it in the beginning, is a kya tumne khaya, right? Something like that. Yeah. But make it with kha liya, that's easier. Kya tumne kha liya? This is not what did you eat, right? Have you eaten?
Or we could induce the contrast. क्या तुमने खाया और क्या उसने खाया.
Yeah, then it's a yes, but that's you're going with her then. Huh? What did you eat and what did you eat? But the other one.
I don't think, again, here the difference would be in the intuitions of the speakers. Can you really say this, just this bit and stop there? Because yours is more natural, meaning to me as a speaker of Hindi. But when she says this, then I think it's sort of incomplete in some sense. Maybe in a certain.
So that's why I added the liya, the completive. क्या तुमने खा लिया?
That's have you. I don't know.
You don't get that? I'm putting it in the front. Yeah.
That's what I've been saying. I'm saying, yeah. So with Ojasvi's example, that is where the context is kya tumne khaya becomes what did you eat.
No, without the context. I'm going to say just that and then we'll move on. Because some of these are open research questions, by the way, right? Like, so we want the same. That's he wants to cut to the chase, remove all this extra verbiage. Give me just a simple question. Kya tumne kha liya? I'm going to add the liya. And he wants to know whether you can get the two readings. Is that your question? Kya tumne kha liya? What is that? This is the thematic one, right? Maybe there's a little bit of a rhetorical flavor to that, right? Yeah.
There's a tendency of putting the question particle near to the object, like क्या खाया तुमने, will have what did you eat, and
Instead of a whole constituent.
But he wants it controlled for.
No.
So,
I think there's again prosody is coming in.
Yeah. No, prosody is cute.
Both.
Yeah. So, क्या तुमने खा लिया? That is definitely a yes no, and that's the polar क्या. क्या तुमने खाया? क्या तुमने खा लिया? That's a what? So, position, but also there is one position where the two seem to differ, but then I would be giving my lecture from next week, so we'll hold off. But you see already now, if this is a, one can ask a deeper question. Why is it what? Why is it the same word? Maybe I haven't seen the connection, right? But maybe there is a connection. So we just analyzed it as, homophony or something, but maybe there's something missing there. Anyway, now we will do good old syntax semantics map. Forget the pragmatics, okay? So we're sticking with the simple case. Which book did Bill buy? Possible answer. Bill bought Pride and Prejudice. I must have been in my Jane Austen phase when I was first doing this. I had a phase many years when I was younger. Then I had a second phase when my daughter was at that age. Maybe I don't remember. Anyway, we have Pride and Prejudice and we have Emma. So typically there's a little bit of a idealization in some sense. We kind of the schema should be more general, but in order to kind of understand what we are doing, it's easy to work with concrete entities. So when you're asking which book did Bill buy, you think of a limited set of books. So let's assume, just for illustration, that we're talking about, we have 2 or 3 books in mind. So Jane Austen's books. And here I just kept 2 for ease of. So when I ask which book did Bill buy, I don't know whether he bought Emma or whether he bought Pride and Prejudice, right? That's the speaker's ignorance of it. I don't know which world I'm living in. Am I living in a world in which he bought Pride and Prejudice or whether he bought Emma? Let me just ask again, not to have too much discussion, but just because I like to mess my own lectures up. Can he buy both? When I ask which book did he buy? Which book? Okay. Can he buy neither? Okay, lots to talk about. Okay, let's pretend for now. Okay, so how do we get this? We want to get a set of propositions, right? So you don't have a proposition, you have a set of propositions, and one of them will be true at least, right? That's the basic case. These are we'll talk about how far you can go from that. How do we get from which book did Bill buy to a set of propositions? Bill bought Emma, Bill bought Pride and Prejudice. Okay, that's what our goal is. In order to get there, I'm going to first do a simple quantifier, a sentence that does not have a WH, and then do the WH case. And I want you to be very honest with me and say how comfortable you are with this, because that will determine a little bit how fast I go with the other stuff, okay? So I'm assuming a basic generative syntax kind of model, and I know there are lots of functional projections and all that we need for certain things. The goal of what we are trying to do, you can add those extra projections. So like aspect, you would, over VP, you would. How many people are familiar with this VP, IP? I think no one uses IP anymore, right? It's all TP. TP. Scratch it and make it TP. Because you want a tense, a note for tense. This is from the 70s, 80s, sorry. Inflectional phrase, but same idea, because we weren't making the distinction between aspect and tense as much. But the idea is VP is where you have the internal argument and then you have something on top. It could have been S, it really doesn't matter. The point is that you have, now if I said Bill bought some book, it will be in situ. In some sense it's there at the base, DP, and in some sense it has been fronted. So that's the arrow moving. And how do we proceed? Well, when we interpret the DP, that is the gap part that's missing, we interpret it as a variable, right? So basically this sentence, the verb itself, the lexical semantics of the verb says it's a two-place verb. I'm looking for something that was bought and someone who bought it. And there are presuppositions attached to it. What you bought hopefully is a non-inanimate thing. We don't want to condone other kinds of things, but certainly the buyer has to be animate, maybe, human, something like that. Maybe corporations can buy stock, whatever. So whatever kind of restrictions there are, lexical restrictions would be captured at that point, right? So lambda x, lambda y, bought yx. So y is the subject, the internal argument comes first, and then you interpret the internal argument as a variable, indexed variable. So it's on the next page, I think. Yeah. So yes. Yeah. So let me just spell this out, and then I want to have a test, honesty test, like I want to know what is, because it's really not too many, we have the time, so I'm happy to go over it. So is everybody comfortable with the idea that bought is a two-place predicate? Although in Hindi we often just say usne kharida, right? It's still a two-place predicate, right? So what happens? Does it translate buy, khareedna, and buying? Are they the same or are they different? Are they two places in both languages? Okay, everybody is on board with. You've been fed that there must be a small pro. Okay, good, fine. I'm on the same boat. So, but in English, definitely we actually need something, but there's a gap. So, what is how many people are comfortable with the lambda calculus? Okay. So the basic idea is this: lambda. So if I just have, let's start with this. By is a two-place predicate, right? So we need two arguments, y and x. When we start with the verb, it's got to be abstract, right? So this is how much we know. Y is the buyer, x is the buyee, the thing bought. But this is a sentence in a way. Everything is saturated. But how do we capture the fact that this is still looking for something initially? Is that we have the lambda abstract. What it does is it says it binds something that is inside, and it says I'm a function from things of type x to bought yx, to the things that that some y bought. So for now, let's just make this bill for 1 second, okay? So this is bill. If I say bill bought x, that's like saying I can point to this and bill bought this. X is just a variable, a free variable. If I didn't have this, this would be a full sentence. You would have to ask me, what are you pointing at? You would have to, so this would have to have a value that was given contextually. What this says is, I'll take a sentence, it could be anything, here it is a sentence, and I'm going to be a function from things that could be bought, or objects. All the objects, such that I go through everything, and this will give me a set of things. All of those things that make Bill bought X true. So suppose Bill goes shopping, this means I have to go through each and everything in my domain and ask the question, Bill bought this? Yes or no? Someone, the god of model theory tells me whether in this model this is true or not. In another model it could be different. And if it is true that Bill bought this, then that thing will go into this set of objects. So, I don't know, microphone or whatever it's called. Then I go to the laptop and I say, I'll fill in the laptop for this X. I'll remove this. I'll do lambda conversion. So, it's like every time I put in something from here, I test, is this true or false? And then if it is true, I put it in here. Okay? Any questions? So this changes. This becomes a function from objects to things bought by Bill. So this is a one-place predicate because you're getting a set of objects. By the same token, this is this one. Oh. Thank you. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't remove that. Suppose this was what we started with. I can add one more. So it's the same thing. Now we have set of objects, let's say M and laptop. Let's say, suppose these are the two things that he bought. Now, we're no longer talking about Bill. We're talking about any person, right? So this is like, it's a function from individuals, let's say, to the set of objects that individual bought. And so we play the same game. Now I start looking at Renuka, right? And I say, what are the objects that Renuka bought? So I get pairs. So this will be, let's say, Renuka bought, I have two up. The way to do this is probably, let's say the set of individuals are Renuka and Avinash. And the set of objects are, whatever you call this, laptop, right? So these are all the possibilities in a given situation, one thing may be true or another may be true, but Renuka can buy a laptop, and Renuka can also buy the microphone, and Avinash, laptop, Avinash can buy my. So these are all the possibilities. In a given situation, maybe these two are true, maybe, that's, we want, as you said earlier, we want it to be possible that nothing is an answer. We might argue with it, but this is the range of possibilities for this in a world where there are two individuals that could be buyers and two things that could be bought. In reality, of course, you would have 2 by 2, so that, but we are putting in the presuppositions, the lexical, we used to call it subcategorization or whatever. What are the restrictions that buying places on the two objects? Okay, so this is what we start with. Now what happens is, so this is before we put this in, this is the kind of space of possibilities. Now we put in Bill as so the first argument that we put in was, sorry, I put this wrong. The internal argument comes first, this comes second, right? So the verb first combines with the direct object. But the direct object is a variable in this case because it got moved. But if it wasn't, then we would fill in the value and then some of these options would go, right? So suppose we were saying Bill bought the laptop. Then what I would do is fill in, we would do lambda conversion, we would put in laptop here, right? So this would go away and I would do lambda conversion, this would be laptop. So then what are we doing? We're looking at the set and we're saying, okay, this is not relevant, this is not relevant. We are only looking at, we have fixed the value of the internal argument, and now we are looking for all the y's that could buy the laptop. Then we have only two possibilities. So basically it's a matter of saturating the arguments. So you start with all possibilities, you fill in one, you rule out the non, whatever it doesn't fit into that, then you look for what's left, right? And then you work with that. So in this particular case, we had x sub 1 that gets filled in. This is 1i, whatever. So this is again, it's an indexical, right, at this point. So whatever it could be pointed at, it doesn't matter at this point, we have this. But then we get to Bill, so that is easy. I put Bill in here. And these are of the same type. This is looking for individuals who could be potential buyers. This is a possibility, so I put in Bill here. So what we have now, this is, I'm at the IP or TP number 3 stage, right? So let me make sure I have 1 and 2, the way you understand. So what is number 1? So the basic principle is functional, there are 2 or 3 things that will come up along the way. One is functional application. You take the meaning of this, you take the meaning of that, and you combine them through functional application. Sometimes things work out, sometimes they need a little twisting, okay? Here it's working out. V, the meaning of V is this, the V is looking for lambda x individual, and on the other side, so that is the meaning of lambda x, lambda y, what y x, and you apply it to the meaning of the DP, which is x sub I, because it's a trace. Traces are treated as denoting variables of the right type. So you do functional application and you get lambda y, what y x sub I. So you've saturated that with this variable. Everyone good with the first step? Okay enough? Okay. 2.
Could you just explain
Yeah.
a bit more what is this xi?
Okay.
Can it saturate the...
So x sub I, basically what we have, when we have these fronted arguments, or displaced arguments, I should say, in some sense they have to mark their base position, right? Because suppose you front everything, you are in Bulgarian, you want an answer who bought what, not, or who saw what. You don't want who likes who, you want to know the person, you want to know who's the subject, who's the object, right? So indexing is simply a way of keeping track, not losing the information, what their base position is, right? And so when we say we translate it into a variable, we translate it into an indexed variable, and those of you who've done Hyman Kratzer, you probably are very schooled in this, but it actually even goes back, Montague had these indexed variables, even though he didn't have movement exactly, but the correlate of movement. The idea is when I hit the binder, the operator, then that indexing is going to be crucial, right? That's how I'll bind that position. And we'll see that coming up later. So for now, just keep in mind that in a way it could have been, if you had two x's instead of one y and one x, then I would have been very important, right? Because suppose I was using the same variable, then whether it's I or j would have mattered. So here it's a little extra, but the idea is still the same. Is that clear to everybody? Some of these things will get repeated, so don't feel like if you didn't ask now and later you have a question, you can't, because you can. I can just say I won't answer it, but that's my prerogative. Okay. 2, this is now we are at the VP stage. So the thing about a VP is that it's still looking for one argument, the external argument. And now, 2 is the IP. All the arguments are there. So you have the VP meaning already. It's looking for a buyer. And now I'm providing the external argument, which is the name bill. What does bill denote? Bill denotes, again, functional application, right? So you have lambda y bot y x sub I. That is what we just did. And now you're feeding in the argument bill. Bill is also of the right type. So you can do lambda conversion, and you will get bot bill x sub I. Now comes the fun part, which is the DP. DP sub I, some book, which was fronted. Now notice that this fronting is not in the syntax proper, right? Not in surface syntax. This is how we interpret, this is after quantifier raising. There are people who don't believe in quantifier raising, and they have valid ways of interpreting it in C2. We are not going to go with that, not because there's anything wrong with it, but we can't fight every battle in every paper, right? We can't re-argue every case. I'm going to talk in terms of QR, okay? Without justifying it. QR is a way of getting things like quantifier scope. When you say someone likes everyone, you all know, right? It is ambiguous. It can either mean everyone likes someone, can mean the same person, different people, etc., etc. So that's what we are following here. What is the meaning of what is it? Subbook. So the meaning of subbook is, one way to think about it is to say that it's really not just, so a book can be, we said Pride and Prejudice, we said Emma, right? But there's a sense in which I can refer to, I could be talking about one or the other. How do I talk about that? I can think in terms of what are their properties that at least one of them has. So for example, I could say, give me a property that at least one of them has. Emma, Pride and Prejudice. Author is the same, so written by the same author. So you could have, pardon? Let's make it more precise. It's written by Austen. What else? They're books. So being a book, having a title. I know you said something funny. I'll catch you at lunch. Having a character with the same name, that is Emma, right? Something like that. So named after a character. Now, why is this important, named after a character? Because both of them don't have it, right? But some book says it doesn't matter, as long as one of them has it. So named after a character in the book, start named with a name starting with letter E, etc. All of these don't have, at least one of them has to. So if I said written by Thomas Hardy, that should not go in there, right, for these two books. And now what happens? This becomes the boss. This is the function. What is the argument? Well, at this point, we have a impasse. On the one hand, we have a set of properties. I can ask you, what are the things written by Oscar? I'm going to simplify my life a little bit. Oops, this is what I was afraid of. Tomorrow I'll see if I have a pocket. Okay, let me, written by Austin, for example. I can go around a set of books and it's a lambda abstract, right? It's like saying lambda X written by Austin X. And then I can go and say, is this book written by Austin? And you can say yes or no. Is that written by? So it's a property. And on the other side, now you have a full-blown sentence. Bill bought X. So how are we going to combine? A property is looking for something of type E. And this is, so we are in a bit of a bind here. This is where the indexing that Avinash was pointing to will come in handy. So not only are we interpreting these two pieces, but now this connection has to be made precise. And that connection says, take that IP. So let's see, I'm looking at 3. It says take the DP, some book, make that the function, and apply, the argument is going to be the IP. But the IP is not a good argument because it's not of so this is saying set of properties. Property is type ET, right? We'll talk more about this again when if all of it is not familiar, go with the flow a little bit. We'll come back to it later or maybe. Okay. So basically it's saying I'm looking for properties and I'll then decide whether it's true or not. So if I was to say some book is written by Austin, you want to say it's true. If I said some book is written by Hardy, you'll say no, false. That's our basic intuition, true and false. But how do I make the sentence Bill bought X sub I into a property? By abstracting, lambda abstracting over X sub I. So now what do we have? On one side we have, this is what we had, right? So we have this option. Because it is co-indexed, we can abstract over this. And now we have the set of things that Bill bought, right? Let's assume that Bill bought, when he went shopping, what did he buy? He bought Emma and he bought vegetable, I don't know, cauliflower, whatever. Who knows? Something else. He may have bought many things, but at least he bought Emma, let's say. Now, the sum book denotes all of the properties. One of the property will be of some book is that it was bought by Bill, right? In that context. So this will include bought by Bill. And now it is a simple matter, once you've done this abstraction, to check, is this property in this set? So it's always just set membership. That's the basic game, if something belongs in the set, you say true. If it doesn't belong in the set, false, right? So now we have, in a context where he bought Emma, or Pride and Prejudice, you would say the sentence is true. Some book, Bill bought some book. But suppose he hadn't bought, let's say he had only bought vegetables and Coke or whatever, this property would not be in there, right? Bought by Bill. We would follow all the same procedure. Co-indexing, we would abstract over it and say, what, this is the set of things that Bill bought, or the property of being bought by Bill, different ways of saying it. But it wouldn't be here because neither Emma was bought by him nor Pride and Prejudice was bought by him. And then the sentence would come out false. Bill bought some book in a context where this is all that there is. But the process is the same, right? So you have type mismatch, you have indexing, you have a free variable that you abstract over. So this is what we call operator variable chains, right? That's something you've heard about. So QR involves creating operator variable chains. That's what this is all about. Anyway, with all of this, what is the end result? The end result after you've done all your functional application is basically, ignore that intentional abstraction and all that. Basically, it means I have a proposition. There is a book such that Bill bought it. Okay. What does that mean? What is that little intentional operator? It simply means a sentence is not just true or false, right? Like we don't know whether he bought anything, but we know what it would take for that sentence to be true. So it doesn't, it's, the truth value is what we get once someone has given us all the specifications of the situation. But you want one level of abstraction, because as long as you know a language, if I just say to you, we've been discussing Bill bought a book, you're imagining possible situations in which it would be true, possible situations in which it would be false. I could give you pictures and you would say true, false, etc., right? We all share that intuition. So this basically gives you the essence of the theory that says sentences denote sets of words. Sentences are propositions, sets of situations. That's what this is about. That what we know when we know a language, when we know a sentence, what we know are the truth conditions under which it would be true. Whether Bill is wearing a red shirt or a blue shirt doesn't matter, right? To the truth of the sentence, Bill bought a book, because his clothes are not relevant to that sentence. But whether he bought a book or a magazine is, right?
I have a question.
Mhm.
In one, we have lambda is lambda y bought yx, and
Uh-huh.
we took the argument as xi.
Mm-hmm.
And the point is that the argument is a variable itself.
Yes, yes.
So
Mm-hmm.
why do that? Why not just keep lambda x as it is?
Um,
Because anyway we need that lambda x later.
okay. If we left lambda x there, then our next argument is Bill,
Yes.
right? So I'll answer your question in two. I think I know why you are asking this question. Suppose we just left it as it is. Now we come to Bill, right? And we do lambda functional application, lambda conversion, we'll go into the wrong place, right? So we have to get rid of that x by marking. So did you get the reason why